Hey there, folks. Welcome to Dev by Design. Thank you for joining us at our slightly later hour today. If you were here earlier, you know that we pushed back to make room for some of our exciting release streams. So that's happening. And if you have not signed up, we've got some webinars happening later this week. You'll definitely want to check those out, catch everything that is new in the Kendo and Telerik R2 release. But you've already heard about that. You talked about that all day. That's not really what we're here for. In fact, I am here with Clara, and we are going to get into all sorts of lovely design and designer-developer workflow and handoff and all sorts of questions today. So, Clara, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Clara Ujiie, and I'm a designer advocate on the Figma team. A lot of people ask me what that role means, and honestly, I'm still growing into it and learning more about it. But we connect with our Figma community, and we help them sort of see the benefits of working in Figma and how it might map to their unique workflows using the tool and using other design tools. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I know we have some topics around working with developers and just people who might not identify as a designer, but thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm genuinely so thrilled that you're here. You mentioned that you're still growing into the role. Is this a new position for you at Figma?
Yes, it is. So all the designer advocates, we sort of abbreviate as DA. They have to be in a design role beforehand. And so before this, I was working as a product designer, both in design systems and design operations. And then when I learned more about what this role meant, like connecting with the community, I was super intrigued. But it was certainly something I had never done before. So it's been a journey.
No, I was a little bit like selfishly curious because this is my first developer advocacy role, and I've been here at Claras almost a year now, just under a year.
Oh, nice. So, awesome.
It sounds like we might have had kind of similar experiences there, jumping over into the advocacy side of things and feeling things out. But it has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed getting to do this.
So. Yeah. What would you say is the main switch from your previous role and then this dev advocacy role for you?
Oh, man. I think for me, it seems silly, but like the biggest switch was the lack of structure. Because I was on an engineering team. And we worked in like almost every engineering team. We worked in like 2-week sprints, and there was a lot of structure and ritual, and everything went through Jira, and it was always, tasks that were assigned to me and something I could very clearly like track and move off my to-do list.
Right.
And to move into dev advocacy and be like, oh, my life is not run in 2-week segments anymore.
Yeah.
Like, how do I plan things? How do I keep track of my own to-do list? And like, how do I track what's working and what's not? Like, that's probably been the biggest adjustment. It seems silly to be like sprints, but also sprints.
Yeah, right. No, that totally resonates with me. And I feel like a lot of people on our team too. There used to be more, I guess, clearly defined syncs or team meetings and tracking what's doing well and what's not. But I hear you, it's harder to do that on almost like an individual basis, sort of.
And I mean, there's certainly some perks to it too. I enjoy the kind of freedom that comes with not being beholden to quite as much ritual. I do not miss sprint retrospectives. I do not miss all of that. I worked at a company once that would spend like almost a whole day at the end of every 2-week sprint doing like retro and looking at what
really
we've done.
Intense.
Ooh, I used to do laundry that day in the background.
Yeah.
So I could get something productive done.
Yeah.
So that part's nice. I'm happy with a little bit less ritual and ceremony, but also, weird balance to kind of strike.
For sure. Yeah.
But to shift us over a little bit onto the design side of things, I was really interested because when we first connected and we're kind of chatting about like, what do we want to talk about and what's the topic and what's interesting to you. You threw out this one about how everyone is a designer. And I really liked that. Yeah. And I was very interested, especially because you were like, I think it might be a little bit of a polarizing opinion. I was like, great. I like those even more.
Yeah.
So as someone who kind of started off in design and has moved into development, that was kind of my story. I'm curious. I want to hear a little bit more on the everyone is a designer take.
Yeah,
See if we
totally.
get
And
some hot takes in the comments.
for sure. And another reason I wanted to talk about it during this stream with you is also because I feel like I might have a really one-dimensional view on it, and just having more conversations with people expands my own perspective. So where my thinking sort of is right now is that everyone sort of is a creative, strategic thinker. And to me, one of the hardest parts of design is just getting people together, getting minds together, and coming up with solutions to problems, whatever medium or mode that might be. And sort of another facet to it is that sometimes, again, my limited view, like just my own experience, I find that sometimes the design industry feels a little gate kept in like entering the industry. And I think it's counterproductive to, I guess, the goals of the design industry, problem solving in general. And I want to open that up a little bit more. And I feel like Figma as a platform really supports that narrative. And so it's something I'm really passionate about. It's something that I wanted to continue to push, even joining Figma as well. And so I'm honestly really curious what people think, whether that's like viewers and yourself as well, how people view that sentence, everyone is a designer, because it is sort of like, there's like a level of, oh, I put in like all my years as a designer. Like not everyone can be a designer. And so I sort of like hearing those different perspectives.
Yeah, I think in general, I would say I agree with like 90, maybe even 95% of that statement. I think my tweak would probably be everyone can be a designer, or everyone is capable of being a designer. But it's really interesting. I liked, and I'm still kind of chewing on what you said about gatekeeping, because I kind of see that, and it's interesting because I'll see it actually moving both ways. I think there are definitely designers and people who, like you said, have like gone to art school and put in the time and put in the years or whatever, and have this feeling of like, well, no, you didn't do all of this, and so you're not a designer.
Right.
And on the flip side, I will also sometimes talk to developers who will look at design work and what goes into it and go, I could never. I just don't have the capability. I don't have the talent. I don't have the eye or whatever. And they will almost kind of gatekeep themselves out of it, which
that's so interesting. Yeah.
It always surprises me when people talk that way. And so I tend to kind of be, maybe that's a boring position to be, is like exactly in the middle of like, I think anyone can be. I think it takes a little bit of work. I think it takes a little bit of training. It's a skill, in the same way you can't sit down at the piano if you've never played before and, bang out a Mozart piece,
Yeah, totally.
But I think anyone can sit down at the piano and learn to read music. And you could work your way up to that if that's something that's interesting to you. I don't believe in any kind of barriers around natural talent or an eye or whatever. You might be a little bit predisposed to be better at it, to pick things up quickly, but it's learnable by everyone.
Right, absolutely. I think one metaphor that stuck out to me is that of being a cook or a chef, in a way that everyone, to some capacity, is preparing food for themselves or in some way. But I, like, personally, I would never identify as a chef, and like no one should pay me for cooking them food. So I don't know, that metaphor is a little weak, but I think of it in that way because everyone engages in these types of activities, but might not necessarily be paid for it. And there's a level of skill as well. But like, I wouldn't be able to tell someone like, oh, you're not a cook. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to ever say that and like have them feel empowered and confident to get better on their own terms. So that metaphor.
No, I like that metaphor a lot. It feels very, it was Julia Child who was the big on like everyone can cook. Right?
Yeah, right.
It feels very the Julia Child of design.
Yeah.
But
I love
no, I
that.
think that's also, I like that. I like that metaphor a lot because I like how you said that everyone is interacting with food, kind of like whether you consider yourself a chef or not, you're feeding yourself at some point. It's required. And I think the same way people are making design decisions, sometimes without even realizing that they are making design decisions.
Totally.
And it's something that's just a part of life, whether that is actually making, graphic design or UI design choices as a developer, or that's like choosing colors to paint your house or putting together an outfit or like,
exactly.
It is just such a part of life.
Right. And thinking about like advancing your own skill sets, tooling definitely plays a big part of it, and knowing which tools to use at what time. I think that's true for any sort of skill that you want to pick up. And to sort of go back on the food metaphor again, like I think about the invention of the sous vide and how before it was sort of just kept for restaurants or like really large, well-known restaurants established to be able to prepare food in that sort of way. But then when it became cheaper and more accessible to people, I think it was exciting for people who like love food and want to prepare it to be able to prepare it at that level without, paying thousands and thousands of dollars. And so sort of like following that narrative, I think about free tools like Figma that people can sort of dabble in it first and get a taste of some of that tooling and, pursue that without paying thousands of dollars. So yeah, just to like close up that food metaphor, that's all I have.
Good.
That comes
you
to mind.
tied it back together. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
On that note with Figma, we get a fair bit of questioning, both here and in like UI Mondays of devs who are like, I guess I should check it out, or like, where do I start? Or like, they feel, I think, often just super lost, which is fair, because if you were talking to a designer and you were like, here, open up, whatever, Visual Code or Atom or whatever, and just start coding, you'd be lost too. So I'm curious kind of to hear your take on how you think folks who are completely brand new, who might not have come from the design software, who might not have had that, like, used Adobe for years and now you're transitioning into Figma kind of story.
Yeah.
Where do you start?
Yeah, I would say an awesome place to start is Figma Community. So I can actually share my screen right now so y'all can see what that is. And essentially it's a piece of Figma. Am I sharing it right now? Okay, perfect.
I got it.
Yeah, so it's a part of Figma's app. And right now I'm just using the desktop app, but this totally works on the browser as well. You can just go to figma.com/community. And essentially it's this open source platform that allows teams or individuals. So you'll see like material design team or other folks, they can publish their source files, whether that be, a slide deck or their actual design file or a component library file, and make it available for folks to take a closer look. So for folks getting started, what I would recommend is just search for the type of topic or thing that you're interested in. You'll see we already have a couple of pills of preset popular topics. So if you're saying like, oh, I'm super into design systems right now, you can click that or take a closer look. And then once you find one where you're like, oh, that's super cool. So let's just like, I'll click into this one. You can go ahead and duplicate the actual source file. And the reason I love this is being able to use it as a learning resource, because you can just dissect the actual source file if you want to see like the inspect panel, if you're a developer who wants to look at, okay, what are these other companies? How are they structuring their components? And you sort of like want to dig into it. The Figma community platform sort of lets you do that. And so I personally use Figma community as a learning resource, especially when new folks are like publishing new files or new libraries for me to check out. I learned so much. So I would say this is like a really fun place to start.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it can be really hard, and it can feel really intimidating sometimes to just like start with a blank page. You're like, here's my frame, rectangle 1. You're just like, totally. Oh God, what do I do with this? And and being able to kind of start with a jumping off point to like duplicate something and start to just tweak it or make it your own, or like, all right, this is close to what I need, but not exactly, can be a good way to get in. I feel like that's actually a way that a lot of developers learned, right? Is,
Right.
We kind of joke about, people that were editing MySpace pages or doing whatever LiveJournal customizations.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of people learned because they just wanted to take something and tweak it a little bit and make it their own. And it's cool to still see that, I think.
Yeah, totally. I get a lot of questions sometimes on what my favorite Figma feature is. And I honestly, it's like not a joke. I honestly have to say it's copy and paste. I think there's so much power in copy and paste. I know, like perhaps in the development community as well, but to me, I just learned so much from other creators. And so it is my favorite feature.
That I think is an interesting question too. This idea of, certainly you hear a lot of kind of warnings in development about just like copying and pasting random code from the internet, and kind of that it is a great way to learn, but there's also a little bit where eventually you hit a point where you're not learning anymore. You're just kind of putting band-aids on things or patching things together or making things work without necessarily understanding why. I'm kind of curious on the design side what you feel about that. If there's a point at which it's not beneficial anymore, or if there's a point at which it starts to, when you cross that line into from borrowing into stealing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd love to get your take on it too, and maybe learn more about like how the development community thinks through it. Because we do get a lot of questions. Why would you publish your source file? If you're a company, why would you publish your component library for everyone to use? And there's a few, or maybe just a couple of reasons why I would think that. One is if you are a super large platform and other third-party teams need to build on top of it, this essentially accelerates their ability to build product with and for you. And so that's one piece to it. And then another piece that might be a little fluffier is empowering a younger generation to grow up on like this high level work. And if that's their starting place, then when they enter the workforce or contribute and come back to your company, they're going to be so much more advanced and, be able to support you and design tooling and the design industry in the long run. So it's a harder sell for like companies who want to monetize. But I don't know. I think it's something worth pursuing.
No, that's when I am in agreement, and I'll go ahead and admit a lot of that is biased because we have our own components. So we have a Figma kit that we have published that breaks down the design of every single Kendo React component, all of our Kendo UI components.
Yeah.
And that is, a lot of it has to do with easing the level of work and kind of bringing that level of design support to kind of emphasize the designer experience along with the developer experience. So I definitely feel that side of it. I think there's also kind of a piece where it's like, I'm trying to think of like the right way to word it. But even if you're talking about a product that's monetized, that people are buying, there are multiple kind of values, right? And if the entirety of your sales pitch is hooked on one thing, then that's a hard sell too. So it's almost like it's okay to give away pieces of it because overall we still believe there's enough value in the full package that it's worth being, if we can provide value, if we can provide help, if we can make things a little bit easier, that's worth it,
Yeah. So. And yeah, I think it's just part of progress. Like, let's say you publish your design and it has like a hamburger menu and then they make it better. Like you have the opportunity to make it better too. And it's sort of just a back and forth. And it's like, it feels really natural as part of progress too.
Agreed. You'd mentioned a little bit when we talked to the idea of open source design. And I'm curious how, because to me, that would kind of be my inclination of what this sounds like, right? It's the idea of publishing something and then someone else grows, takes it and forks it or duplicates it and adds their own stuff and so on and so forth. And you kind of end up kind of sharpening each other's knives per se through this process.
Yeah.
But I'm I'm curious if that is what you were thinking of when you were talking about open source design, or if there's other pieces to that that you wanted to explore.
Yeah, totally. I think so. I don't think Figma Community as it is now is truly open source, because when you duplicate something down, it's just like a local copy on your Figma instance, and that you can't push it back as if you were, making a contribution through a branch. But I do think that is an ideal state. I think a lot of people are excited with that possibility. I personally am.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like at scale. I don't know what like a PR would look like inside of Figma. Like lots of complications with like diff views and, all the visuals behind it.
Yes.
But I think people are thinking about it more, and people want that to be a reality. Like, oh, if you publish a component library, and there's like a bug, you like set up auto layout incorrectly, something like that. If a community person can just come in and like push a fix, I feel like that would be awesome. And, sort of everyone's contributing.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, that would be really cool. But as it is now, I wouldn't say it is truly open source, but I think it's sort of heading in that direction.
That's fair. I think one of the things that is most interesting to me about that concept is that there's such a structure and a way that development has historically handled version control that is almost entirely non-existent in any kind of codified way on the design side.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that we've struggled with for a long time, and you get the jokes about like the underscore V1, V2, final no really kind of things. And it has been interesting, even as we've moved from these kind of local programs or, everyone's kind of working on their own thing and it's not terribly collaborative, into a collaborative website-based design software that we haven't seen that kind of version control come with it.
Right.
I wonder if I don't have the answer to this. I am at this point just straight up riffing, wondering aloud. Like, I wonder if that's something that we'll start to see. And I wonder if there's actual benefit to that or if there's more drawbacks.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I don't know what that looks like either, just because it is a multiplayer environment where you're making live changes together. Is that something that exists in the development world, like making live code edits together?
There are some things. I would say in general, when you're talking about kind of two developers working on something together, you kind of hear the term pair programming tossed around. But that's not quite the same as like what Figma does with the multiplayer design, in that usually pair programming really is just one or two or maybe three people. And there's still usually someone who's driving and the others who are kind of watching or throwing in comments or like, oh, what about this? What about that? I have seen some code editors that support kind of like a multiplayer view where like if you had code up on your screen and I had code up on my screen, I could see what you were highlighting and changing.
Okay.
And some of that, but it's not, again, it's more one-to-one and less open field. Anybody jump into this file that I'm working on, here's the public share link.
Yeah.
So yes, but no, I guess.
Yeah. And a totally different medium too. So it might not even be appropriate in that way.
Yeah. VS Code evidently has a pretty good one. I'm not a big VS Code person, I'll admit, Ozzy. I'm mostly an Atom user, although at the job before that, I was using the IntelliJ IDE, and they had a really strong pair programming thing. But still, it's almost a little bit different. I'm trying to like come up with, because it's like no statement is ever going to be like 100% foolproof, but like it's a little bit harder with code because what you're changing up here changes the way the code runs down here. And so to change both things at once is a difficult thing, to just like give everyone free reign and like get in and tweak stuff.
Lots of breaking changes.
Right. Yes. And then, not to say that design isn't sometimes the same way, where like if I'm changing the padding and the layout down here and you're changing the layout up here, that when we pull back, it's going to look perfect, but it won't necessarily break. It's never going to not compile the same way that code won't.
Yeah, totally. It'll just be less cohesive in that way.
Right. It might not be as effective a design or as good a design, but it's not going to break, I guess, in quite the same literal way.
Yeah.
So,
even multiplayer. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just still like, how would you make that work? Because now I really want to make it work. Go ahead though.
I was just going to say, even though Figma is completely sort of open, if you share the file out, you can edit together. I think even that is a pattern that isn't like super accepted still. Like there is this idea of, oh, I'm going to make my edits locally and separately. You know, I don't want people to look at it yet. But that's also one of those sides I'm on where I want to support a narrative of sharing earlier and more often, even if it's super scrappy, super messy. So even though Figma does support that, I don't know if people have embraced it yet.
I think so much of that is just, and maybe this is just my own experience. For me, a lot of that was based in how I learned when I was in school, when I was in art school. There's very much this culture of get it right, get it exactly how you would want to see it. Don't show a client multiple options. Make sure that when you put something in front of a client, you have full confidence and full faith in it, and that you're ready to, you know, pitch it. Maybe not full on Don Draper style, because like, you know, who wants to be him? But that idea of like the Mad Men style pitch,
right?
Which I think is becoming less and less of a thing in favor of showing things early, showing wireframes, showing fat marker sketches, you know, this kind of less finished earlier concept work. But that is very much not the way that I learned, which was admittedly over a decade ago. But things have been changing really, really fast.
Yeah. And I guess I would hope for in-house design teams that internally they would be open to sharing with each other. But yeah, I'd love to see that more moving forward, but I think it's hard to just completely shift that paradigm after working in something else for, I don't know, 50 years.
I think it's especially an important part of that kind of handoff thing in the developer designer workflow. Again, for so long, there was this idea of like handing a developer a very pixel perfect, like, you know, here's the mobile version of the website. Here's the tablet version of the website. Like things that we don't do anymore, but we did for so long that it became really ingrained. And saying like, here's the design, please reproduce it perfectly. You're like, Godspeed, I'll see you in 3 months. You know?
But even with sharing work earlier with developers, I still see this tension of like versioning, right? We were talking about versioning earlier, and what is the right way to communicate the status to developers. I'm curious if you had an ideal state, what would that handoff experience look like for you?
Ooh, that's a good and curious question. I'm trying to think, because ever since we said like talking about the Git style of your version management, I keep thinking about how that would look with a design file. And I'm so intrigued by that without actually having it worked out in a way that would work at all. But I love the idea of a design PR, you know, or of a design code review, quote unquote, you know, something where you could kind of say, here's my first swing at it. I'd love to get comments and feedback. And you could get that kind of, you know, again, line by line in quotes, because it's not code, but line by line review of what you've created, and a chance for more senior designers to kind of say, well, I've tried this and it didn't work, or did you know about this other thing, and be able to kind of kick it back and let you try again, you know, make some tweaks and push it back, or have someone else jump in and say, oh, actually this needs whatever, and, you know, push their thing into yours. And that does, of course, unlock a whole mess of how do you select which changes you want to keep and which you don't, you know, and it's different when you don't have the literal lines of code to accept or decline. But yeah, I think that if I could just like wave a magic wand and make all the details work without actually solving them myself.
It's
something like that would be pretty cool.
It's definitely tough. I think today, out of the files that I've seen, I either see people versioning with a page. So it'll be like,
Yeah.
or like, it'll be like a 1.0, 1.2, 2.0 as pages. They might do different branches within Figma. If you're on that org plan, you can do that as well. But I find personally, I just have like a chicken scratch page. It has like all of my old stuff. And then I just try to keep one page that is the most up to date. But yeah, I don't think there's any like silver bullet with versioning a design.
No, it is hard because I tend to favor the way that you work. I tend to be the same way. Even when I'm not necessarily working on like a UI design or something, like I do a drawing in my spare time. And so, with my tablet and whatever, my little setup, there's plenty of times when I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. Or like, I just realized I've been on the wrong layer the whole time, or any number of things. I wish I had version control to jump back a little bit earlier. But on the flip side, it's so much easier to have that one finished thing and to not be saving 23 different versions of whatever you're working on and trying to make sure you're in the right place. There's just a level of complexity that naturally comes with that kind of stuff that is tempting to avoid until you need it and then you wish you'd done it.
Yeah, totally. I hear you. What barriers do you think there are with developers sort of being involved with the design process earlier on?
That's interesting. And chat, feel free to jump in. Anyone who's hanging out, if you got answers to that question, throw it in. My gut feeling, I would say is that a lot of developers don't feel like they're qualified to offer feedback. I think there's a lot of like, unless it's a literal technical, like we can't do that, or we have, something that prevents us from doing X, then there's this feeling of like, just show it to them and be like, yep, that sure is a design. Nailed it. Even if they have thoughts and opinions or kind of gut reactions, I think there's this feeling that they don't know enough to give feedback. It's one that I try really hard to break because as I like to remind them, the people who are going to be using it aren't designers either. So you are just as qualified as our end user to assess a design. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an understandable kind of fear as well. That's another one of those. If someone brought me into the kitchen in the middle of cooking a big complex dish and said like,
what should I do next?
Great. What do you think? How's it going? I'd be like, how do you feel about ordering pizza? Like, I don't know, man. So I think there's that. I think there's also just a little bit of a technical gap in the tools that we use. There's a little bit of, even if a piece of software isn't intrinsically difficult to use, if it's unfamiliar, it's hard to jump in.
I really like that framing you mentioned about how your end user might not be or identify as a designer as well, and you're just as qualified to provide the feedback that you have at that time. Yeah. But it's certainly hard to present your work in a way that facilitates participation too. I feel like that's a whole nother skill. Like, what's the right medium to present this? And I've actually been finding FigJam to be a really great space to do that because it's outside of perhaps a more advanced like framing of your like literal framing of your work. And FigJam is a little friendlier, I feel.
Like a little more casual.
Yeah, a little bit more casual in the mood that it sets. And so back to that copy paste, you can just copy and paste directly from Figma into FigJam. So I've been testing that out a little bit, and I think it's been more successful in like garnering more feedback. But that's just like one method I had at the top of my mind, but I'm always like looking for more suggestions.
There's an interesting comment in the chat. Biggest problem I see is with org structure. Product teams try to monopolize designers' time. So in this case, just like just a prioritization issue, it sounds like, and kind of just seeing where it's most valuable for designers to be spending limited time. I'd be curious to hear kind of your thoughts on that, on making sure that designers are able to do the work that needs to get done, and also,
This is exactly my same experience. Actually, I remember being told like, oh, you don't need to talk to the developer, like I'll be the middleman. And I want to feel like that was well-intentioned, like, oh, I don't want to waste either of your time in, I don't know, going down a rabbit hole or something. But I feel like it's down those rabbit holes where you end up finding a really great solution or just like brainstorming together. So it might just be a misunderstanding of like who should speak to who. But I totally agree. That one's tough though, to sort of like change existing workflows. I don't know if I have like a perfect answer to that though.
I wish. I mean, that's a long term. That is a long-standing problem. It would be great to just have a quick and easy solution to. But if it was quick and easy, we probably would have already solved it, huh?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, this kind of acknowledgement that like a lot of devs will work really well with designers if they're given the chance to
Totally
collaborate early in the process. And really depends, right? Are you doing things like design sprints, right? That was, Jake Knapp, right? Wrote the design sprints book. I was trying to remember so I could credit where credit is due on the idea of design sprints. But yeah, are you doing the Jake Knapp style design sprint? Are you doing a more old school traditional waterfall handoff where something is completely done and pixel perfect before it ever hits a dev's desk?
Yeah. I think we're still shifting, but excited for the future.
Yep. It is interesting because I think the idea of design sprints and collaboration is really interesting and good, but it's also tricky to align like timing wise and make sure that everyone has things to do. And that was something I fought for a little bit, a similar kind of problem. I've typically had a bunch of roles where I've been like 50% design, 50% dev. And sometimes that's really great. It allows me to kind of be the bridge between various teams. And like, I love being able to do both. I enjoy both tasks. So that's a perk. But also, those teams tend to be working on different schedules, right? And a lot of times design is thinking about something and like sketching ideas and doing user interviews and doing research and, seeing what competitors are doing, possibly weeks, if not months, before it's made its way into dev consciousness or awareness.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's this kind of feeling of like, yeah, it would be great to work with devs and to kind of put this in front of them, but they're off doing this other thing and they're on a deadline and they've got their own sprints and they've got their own, things to be done. And how can we make sure that we've aligned time and knowledge and made sure that all the right people are in the right room at the right time, knowing all the same stuff to be able to have this conversation and not feel completely lost or like they just got thrown into the deep end of something that they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, totally. I think, baking in that structure is something that a design operations role might think about a lot. Like, what is the right environment to encourage these conversations earlier? I think some of the best like feedback and suggestions I've gotten were from developers. And it's so precious that I want it earlier on. And like someone just said in the chat, like that thinking that, often happens outside of work hours. You're just like eating, you're like, oh my gosh, we should do that. Like a lot of that comes from being together earlier, even before the pixels hit the frame.
Agreed. I'll just take a quick second to catch us back up for folks that might have joined relatively recently. And hey, Fuel, welcome back. We are chatting today. Dev by Design is at a later time. We pushed back to make room for release streams this morning. I have a wonderful guest here, Clara from Figma, and we are kind of having a wandering chat, honestly, about the role of design and who is a designer and who participates in design work. And yeah, we're just having a chat.
Yeah, there's so many challenges with designer developer workflows. I hear that come up almost every single like customer conversation or like team conversation. So it's top of mind for a lot of people.
it is probably, I would say, the biggest problem in like app development today is this idea that you need both skill sets equally, right? But they're working again on different structures. They have different skill sets. They have different language. You know, you walk into a room of developers and it can feel like they're speaking a whole other language. You walk into a room of designers, it's the same thing. This idea of wanting there to be some kind of translator or bridge or middle ground that is just harder to pull off than it sounds. But yeah, and I'm curious, chat, throw in if you've got any questions or any experiences or anything, even any random unrelated questions you want to throw at Clara. We've got her for the next, 20-25 minutes? Now's your chance.
I'll be here to answer. I'll try. Do my best.
Grill her. Throw her something weird.
I'm open to
it. But no, I think that kind of question of who gets to be involved and when do you loop people in is probably one of the hardest, because it's one of those, you also don't want to waste anybody's time, right? Like everyone is super busy, and the thought of being pulled into another meeting when you might feel like it's too early for you to really be there, you don't need to know this yet, or you don't have any feedback yet.
Right.
That's something that I have certainly heard developers complain about as well. I think there's a lot of good intention and idea behind, like, we'd love to be there early, in the reality of, but I have 10 tickets and they're all due in 5 days.
Yeah.
Like, the ongoing feature work doesn't stop while the new features are being researched and designed. And yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of a talk I heard last week at Config, and it was this team thinking through what design pairing looks like. And there are a lot of, patterns from like pair programming that was taken there. But their whole thing was that instead of a design critique, which is like super structured, you bring like a very specific set of questions and you set up your file in a specific way. Compared to that, with like design pairing, you come sort of unprepared. It sounds like really counterintuitive, but on the sort of flip side, where these are all of the random thoughts that you have, it's a more comfortable space, and sort of across the spectrum of, high structure to flexible, wherever you're at that point, there's room for both. And so I wonder if there are rituals that are, less stressful, that open up, both of those modes. But yeah, I really enjoyed that talk last week by Zendesk. I think they're being published to YouTube later this week, but
nice.
That was a really good one that I'm thinking of.
Do you think there's anything that designers can do to kind of make that feedback session more welcoming to non-designers, basically? Because I think there is a lot of intimidation. It's like if you've ever brought someone who's not like an art student or an art fan into an art museum and gone like, what do you think of this piece? You can like see the panic where they're like, I don't know, the colors are nice. Like, everyone can appreciate and understand art, but all of a sudden when you ask someone's opinion on art in a setting like that, in an art museum or a design critique or a feedback session, I feel like a lot of people kind of panic.
Yeah. I mean, I think targeted questions are super important. At the same time, it can be hard to curate those questions beforehand, but anything would be better than just the, what do you think? Framing. But I do think the tool or digital or physical space that you provide should sort of mimic the level of feedback that you want. And so I sort of mentioned that FigJam example earlier. Let's see if I can pull up an example. Where if you might have a bunch of information or screens in a Figma file, a FigJam file might be more appropriate to garner that feedback. So for example, I might have prepared a bunch of designs here. So let's say I've got like a few checkout screens here. What's fun, I can just go ahead and copy and paste. And now I just have a FigJam file. Upon pasting that in, everything still comes in as a vector, but I feel like this mode with, not a bunch of panels and tools over on the left and right hand side, and then
Yes.
having someone just hop in here, and then they can just go ahead and mark things up, whether it be with like a sticky or a marker or like tape or something. They sort of have that
I love the
flexibility.
washi tape.
I know, I
It's
love
like
the washi tape
not
too.
to get us distracted, but I love that that was like an April Fool's thing that got built in for real. I think it
I
is
know, I think
the
everyone
truest.
was stoked about that. But yeah, you could just like paste things in and
Mhm.
then have them mark it up. And I think the cool thing about this is that a lot of these pieces are locked, but you can still edit some like text if you need to. But then if you want someone to riff with you, they don't have to worry about accidentally moving stuff. Because I think I hear that feedback a lot. Like, oh, I don't want to, accidentally move something I
I
wasn't
don't want to
supposed
break
to.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, so just sort of transferring it into its own space and, treating this solely as this meeting space. Don't worry about the source file. Like, that's going to be fine.
Yeah.
That's another method that comes to mind that hopefully just makes people more connected and more comfortable with that feedback.
I like that idea of using the FigJam as kind of the middle space, right? Because I agree. There is something about bringing someone who is unfamiliar with design software into the actual editing page that can feel
Right.
like a lot.
Yeah, totally.
It's right. I think especially it's interesting that I think the layers and the kind of layer structure is something that's very foreign to people that are not designers, which always like surprises me a little bit just because it is something that I feel like I was very used to. But
Yeah.
the idea of navigating through a file like that can feel really complex in the same way that it would be to just like open up a code base that you knew nothing about. You're just like, oh God.
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
somebody walk me through this. But to be able to kind of isolate these things in FigJam and be able to be like, anything that you do here is not going to affect the original. You're like,
Exactly.
You're safe.
Yeah, just go
It's
wild,
great.
be honest, and it'll be fine.
Great. You can mess it up. It's fine.
Yeah. So hopefully I'd love to just like hear how, if people try this out, how this might work for your team. But this has been something that we've really been liking lately.
Are there ways to move the changes back into your original file without like too much difficulty, or is that just still something a designer has to do?
Yeah, so it depends on like what changes were made. If they're just putting on stickies and putting all their comments with like maybe stamps and stickers and they're confused in an area, everything can be copy and pasted back in. And so what we see is a lot of teams after the crit or the brainstorm, they'll just go ahead and copy and then paste this back into Figma, where then the internal design team, they can like consolidate all of that feedback and do what they need to do with it. But because they can't actually change from FigJam, they can't like change like a border radius or anything. There's not going to be a lot of visual updates happening. But I think actually, let me check if the number came through. Yeah, so if you update the copy, that will come through.
Nice.
Back. So
I'm laughing a little bit, not at this question, Fuel, but just because we were talking about this, I think literally maybe 5 minutes before you jumped on.
Yeah.
But I am curious because I know you mentioned branching in Figma, which is something that I think is pro plan exclusive, but I'd still love to kind of hear about that as maybe an option for version control.
Totally. So there's different ways to approach versioning. We talked earlier about just like creating a new page if you wanted to do like actually put it in here. Now, Figma also has version history in the background. So every single Figma file, I can go ahead and show that version history and take a closer look at those changes. Nice. But you'll see that a lot of these are just like auto-saved, soft save, but you can also do a hard save. So if I were to like click this plus, if you have something that you want to align with development on in terms of naming, this would be a good place to put it. But branching is also a neat way to do that, just because it prevents like accidental changes. Again, like if I were back on this page and, I accidentally moved something, branching can really handle that. So if this was like a V1.1, you can go ahead and create a branch. Let's just call this like a V2.0 of that flow. And then after creating this branch, it's just going to create a duplicate of that file branched off of it. So you'll see this little squiggly arrow icon. And now I'm free to sort of I can like blow up the file as I want now. I can make the changes that I need to. Like, I don't know, let's change this to a purple. And we want to explore that for the second version. The reason I really like this approach is compared to, the live file, or maybe this is actually what's in production now. You don't want to alter that, but you want to work on that next iteration. And branching sort of lets you do that. So after you are saying like, okay, 2.0 is ready, we can then go ahead and merge those changes, and then it'll like replace that original one. So between sort of pages, the actual version history, and branching, there's a lot of different options for approaching it inside of Figma. But hopefully that gives a little taste of what you could do.
Another good question in the chat. Do you have any advice on sharing design tokens with Figma and code? And I'll let you answer it. And then I also have an answer because that's something that we've been working on. We've got a piece of software in progress that does.
Oh, amazing. Okay, that's awesome.
But
so when I think about like reusable color styles or reusable text styles, there is a way for you to sort of bake that in. So you'll see we have some drop shadows that we can reuse across files. But if you start getting into things like padding, like if you want to treat an extra small padding, 4-pixel padding, and treat that as a reusable design decision, there are plugins that you can explore. So there are a couple plugins, actually a lot of plugins. So if I just let's just type in like tokens in Figma Community and then go to the plugin area, you'll see, okay, like 61 plugins that support these types of workflows. Depending on what is important for your team, it can accomplish different things. So Figma tokens, it'll gather all of those like granular design decisions and put them in a JSON file where you can export out and reuse. But if it's important for you to sort of like push back from your code repo into Figma, that's a different workflow. I wouldn't say, again, there's no like turnkey solution with this. It really depends on your unique workflow, but these are fun things to sort of explore. But Kathryn, I'd love to hear your take on how you all approach it, just because I love hearing how teams do this.
Yeah. Do me a favor then, and if you'll search in the plugins for Unite UX.
Okay, Unite UX. This one right here.
Yeah. So at Kendo, we've built, or rather Telerik, because it works with all of our kind of Kendo solutions and our Figma kits. We've got a piece of software called Unite UX that allows for kind of a side-by-side comparison and kind of functions as that designer-developer handoff space, right? Mm-hmm. And it was designed especially to work with our Figma kits. So we've got Kendo component libraries and we've got Kendo Figma kits that are the design breakdown of all of those components. Unite UX kind of lives in the middle. And this plugin helps take the decisions, the design decisions and the tokens out of Figma and into Unite UX, where you can make that kind of comparison and check to make sure that what's happening in the code is looking right compared to what's in the Figma files. And then you can export from Unite UX. And because the design tokens are automatically, not automatically, because we've built the Figma files such that the design tokens align one-to-one with all of our Sass variables. When you export from Unite UX, it'll just kind of work, just clicks into place. So yes, there are some options. That one is ours that we've built to help kind of ease that handoff a little bit and to work especially well with folks using our Kendo libraries. But as you can see, we are definitely not the only ones that are attempting to solve the design tokens dilemma.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to have to install this one and play around with it.
It's fun. Yeah. Let me know off screen. I'll get you a trial license to Unite UX if you ever want to play with it.
Oh, amazing. Cool. So, and all of the kits here are available as well.
Yeah. Anyone can, I keep wanting to say clone because that's not what it's called.
Yeah.
Anyone can duplicate one of our Figma kits. Those are, of course, completely free. You can play with those and you can use those. We, in fact, have a blog that will be coming out soon, as soon as we get through release stuff about using the Kendo Figma kits as a jumping off point for a design system. But you can totally use them without using Kendo libraries, but
Yeah.
it'll be way better if you do.
Awesome.
Another good question. Can you diff branches to see the differences?
Oh, great question. So yeah, let's say I've made back on this file where we were working on a new thing. Let's say we even wanted to change this copy. Okay, this is a terrible copy change, but just to make a change, and we're at 2.0. So if I go ahead and try to review and merge these changes, Figma is going to go ahead and detect what changes were made. So you'll see, okay, I have that purple update with the main file and then that branched file. We have the side-by-side, but you can also do like an overlay if you have like a really minute copy change that you want to take a closer look at. This could be helpful. So you'll be able to see the difference between that main and the branch.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is there a way to like accept some changes, or is it like an all or nothing yes or no?
Yeah, really good question. You can't cherry pick changes right now. But let's say you make a change on main, you can bring that into your branched file and then sort of discard your branched update if you were to edit on the same thing. But yeah, I know the team's been thinking about, okay, I just want like a couple of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting how the like Git flow has begun to influence the design process. And
yeah.
It is not something that I would have like predicted on my like design trends bingo card 5 years ago, but I'm honestly very here for it. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of paradigms that are really appropriate to bring to the design workflow world. But there's like a question like, oh, just because it is in that, just because it worked for development, should it be mapped over? And I think that's like this constant question that our team has been asking. Just because there's so much available to pull from, but you know, should there be a design PR? I'm not sure. I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that question.
I don't know that any of us are. Just guess, try it, and see how it works.
Yeah, totally.
No, that's actually one of my favorite little soapbox rants that the folks on Dev by Design have heard plenty. Is that developers are very rarely expected to learn as much design as designers are expected to learn development. And this idea of what you need to know about code and what you need to know about development process in order to be an effective and a good designer is proportionally so much higher than the reverse. And I would love to see that even out, just
out a little more. Yeah, I haven't thought about that too much, but that's an interesting observation.
But yeah, just the idea of like to be a good UI designer, you have to know a fair bit about how HTML and how CSS works and how, you know, browser interactivity works and what you can and can't do and how animation works in the browser and the limitations of some of this stuff and what libraries your team is using and what dependencies you'd have to add to do things. Like there's a huge amount of stuff that I think we don't even think about that designers have to learn in order to create user interfaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And very rarely is that the other way around. So that's my rant until the day that I die.
I love it.
Like, yeah, joking in the comments. Can't ask developers to learn things. Harsh feel. And then, hello, 11 wyverns. God forbid we had 12. I'm glad that you're here.
Me too.
But I think we're mostly at the end of our hour. Although if anyone had any last thoughts, rants, witty quips, now's your chance to throw them in the chat.
I saw someone's favorite plugin is Motion. That's a really good one.
What does Motion do? I'm curious.
Yeah, so
I saw that and then got distracted and forgot to highlight it.
So it'll help you like sort of operate your prototype more as like a keyframe sort of workflow. So like if you're more familiar with After Effects and you want to work like frame by frame and have it animate between those two things, that could be a really strong plugin. I'm trying to think some of my favorite plugins. Do you have a favorite plugin, Kathryn?
Oh, I think mine, okay, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's honestly one of the few things that drives me a little bit nuts about Figma is that I can't see the preview for what different fonts look like in the font
Yes,
selection
the font
dropdown.
preview.
I desperately, my kingdom for font preview. So I do have a plugin installed that shows me what all of the different fonts look like because I do not have the entire catalog of Google fonts memorized yet. I'm working on it one day.
Oh, amazing. I didn't actually know there was a plugin for that. What is that one called?
Let me actually open my Figma now and
Maybe
find
it's
out.
called font.
Because I ranted about it once on Twitter and I got like 20 million recommendations for this plugin, and honestly 10 out of 10 they were correct.
Oh,
Like,
amazing. Is it this one or is it a different one?
I think it's, yeah, it is font preview.
Oh, sweet. Install that.
Yeah. And it just like, you can make it lets you preview every single thing there and like search and like mark certain fonts as favorites if you have like a handful that are used in your design system or whatever. So that one all the time, because I'm forever like, forum, God, what does that one look like? You know, what's the difference?
Same. Happens to me all the time.
Oh man. What about you? Is motion your favorite, or would you pick a different?
Oh, I knew the question would come back and I was trying to think of one.
Yeah, you don't get to throw that at someone without expecting.
I know. There are honestly so many. Okay, there's a really great one called Explosion where it'll blow up your file. You just like you work on your file and then you're tired of it. It'll like move everything randomly. I think it just like randomly moves and rotates it to the side. So this is a good one. I'm scared to install it, but I've heard amazing things about it.
I'm so curious because I have definitely gotten to the point where I would very much like to blow up whatever I'm working on. Does it actually get rid of anything, or does it just throw them around the page?
It'll just physically like throw it around the page. Yeah.
Even better. Perfect. Yeah. Destruction with no permanent consequences.
Yeah, and you always have the version history to go back. So
right. Oh man.
This is an amazing plugin to sort of end our conversation on too.
Yeah. The RMRF for design.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Fuel. And a couple chats that I missed earlier. My environment is a wish for siloed knowledge. I'm front end, I don't want to do back end, vice versa. That's fair. I have said that exact sentence before. And then in the same breath, we'll be like, but developers should learn design.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's integration work. I'm not doing it. Yeah. Changing the front end without being a front end. No, I totally get that. And like, I do think there's a middle ground, right? Like I'll leave on that wishy-washy take, which is everything in moderation, including moderation, right? So I think it's totally fair to be like, I don't enjoy this work. It's not in my title. I'm not getting paid for it. I'm only going to do so much of it. And knowing, I like to say just enough to be dangerous, right? Like just enough to get in there and be able to have a conversation about it and like be able to communicate around it without actually necessarily doing the work yourself.
Exactly.
So I agree. If you don't want to do design work, I would even say most designers don't want you to do design work either if you don't enjoy it. We agree. Stay out.
Yeah, I love it.
But if you can learn just enough to be able to give feedback on a design or articulate what's not working in a layout or pass along user feedback, or that can be a huge, huge help to closing that kind of dev designer divide.
Yeah, and that comment about, I guess, resourcing can be a challenge too.
Yeah. Early designers available where I've been working. And it's a struggle. I've seen a lot of developers that kind of want to brush up and learn like just the basics. I've been doing a conference talk the last few conferences and a couple coming up called Learn Enough Design to Be Dangerous, where the idea is just to give like a super high level overview of art and design so that devs know just enough to be able to get in and do kind of what they're hoping to do and looking to do without necessarily needing a designer or a design team. Because agreed, sometimes you've just got one, sometimes you've got none at all. Sometimes you're in a startup situation, sometimes it's just you working on a side project.
I
would
love
be
that
great.
encouragement.
It would be great if we always had exactly what we needed. Yeah. Great if the company is 3 people.
That's a good point. The ratio.
Right. We're often just kind of working with what we got. If the company's over 100.
Mm-hmm.
But all right, I know I've kept you a little bit over time. Thank you for hanging out just a smidge
Of course,
longer.
this was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, chat, for coming to hang out with us. Thanks for jumping on at our later hour. If you have not signed up yet for some of the webinars, I probably somewhere have a banner. There it is.
Oh, nice.
Oh, I remembered how to use StreamYard. Yeah, come back on the 18th. Maybe not here because it won't be here. We'll be in like GoToWebinar or whatever. You can sign up at that link and catch everything that is new in the R2 Kendo UI release. And there is a lot. So on that note, I will go ahead and wrap us up. Thanks for hanging out with us, chat. And thank you for coming on, Clara. It's been wonderful.
Of course. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.